Thank you to everyone that's joined us so far, and welcome to this webinar where we are going to be getting into an introduction to calibration. So these are essentially going to be the steps that you can take, or you should be taking, on pretty much every install where you've got a television, display or projector, that are just going to enhance the out-of-the-box experience, maybe give you an insight into the extra steps you could be going to that could actually form part of a business and be a service that you could be selling sort of as a full calibration on the bigger systems. But I'm going to let Jason cover all of that through his presentation. We've got Jason here and Dustin, both from Murideo. And Murideo, as we know, are the best test tools on the market and the calibration tools, from the Fox and Hound right the way through to the 6As and the 7 generator. But I'll let these guys make a quick introduction and then we will get going with the full presentation. So Dustin, do you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, my camera's not on. Somebody took my my fun camera, so I'm really blurry, so I'm going to not have that on. But I just wanted to hop on here and say thank you all so much for joining us. A lot of good information in here. Jason is a rock star when it comes to this stuff. Whatever you do have questions on, please don't hesitate to reach out. Obviously, Aldous is one of our greatest partners out there too, so either way, we'll get you taken care of one way or another. The Fox and Hound is going to be a big one we're looking at today, but the calibration is also a very big one, especially with ISF coming up here in Barcelona here in January, February, right at the very end there. So definitely some good information. But once again, I just wanted to say thank you all for joining, and I'm going to pass it over to Jason.
Cool. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Damien. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. This is just one of many topics in this industry that's near and dear to my heart. So one thing we wanted to really cover here is, a lot of people look at calibration as this, this rabbit hole thing you have to go down, and you have to buy all this expensive equipment, and you have to buy software and, learn all the displays and do that kind of thing. And there's definitely some truth to that. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that within 15 minutes or so, there are some things that you can do to optimize the picture as that projector or that TV comes out of the box. So we really wanted to go through today and talk about what the benefits are of calibration to the installer and to the integrator, and also to the customer at the end of the day. And after we cover some of the basics today, we'll talk a little bit more about what you can do if you wanted to go down that rabbit hole and get into color correction and those types of things. But it's just one of those situations, and I know a lot of people on this call are probably very similar, but when you go to a friend's house and you can tell that their TV has motion processing turned on or energy savings turned on, you end up taking the remote, say, hey, give me the remote. And you just do some minor adjustments. I know a lot of us are like that, but we'll go like one step beyond that, but one step before taking out the test gear and using software and things like that. So in order for me to share my screen, maybe Damien, if you could give me some advice.
Yeah, if you give me 1 second. What I have done, just as a quick starter, I have created a couple of questions, just then we can get a feel for kind of who's in the room, so to speak. So hopefully you should all have seen a little pop-up come on screen there. So the first question here, just, are you currently offering a full calibration service? So, software, hardware, color correction, more than just the things you would do with just the menu items in your panel. And we'll keep this quite quick and snappy. So I think we've got most of those people answered now. Give that another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so looks like, 2/3 are not offering full calibration. We've obviously got some people in the room that have done calibration or are doing calibration. So that is great. Let's just close that one off. And we've got a question in early. Yes, Liam. Sorry, yes, this is being recorded. Back to the polls. Another quick question. There's only 3. It's not a massive quiz, this one. So do you have an understanding of kind of what we're going to get into here today? Are you already fine-tuning the image? Let's see what we've got going on here. A little bit closer on this one.
Hey guys, as you're answering these, I just want to reiterate, we're all here to learn. So, don't be shy, and, there really are no wrong answers here. We're here to help.
Yeah, this is just to kind of see who we've got, just then we can, even know where we're at. So yeah, so most people are doing, the majority of people are doing some adjustments, but twice as many do it to their preference rather than with the client. So, okay, so that's good answers. Thank you. And the final quick one, how many of the people in the room actually know who the ISF are? And I put in brackets the Imaging Science Foundation there. Just nothing to do with Tom Cruise. And I forget the name of the movie franchise.
That's funny too, because if you Google ISF, there's a Lexus model number ISF, so it gets confusing on what you're looking for.
Perfect. Excellent. And most people do know who they are. Fantastic. Right, there we go. Jason, is us done. I am going to throw control over to you. You should now be able to share your screen.
Okay, accept and screen share. And then Damien, just give me a quick confirmation that you can see my screen here.
Absolutely. We're good to go.
Okay, great. And then I'll fire up my laser pointer. That way you guys can see what I'm pointing at. Okay. Okay, so as we said, this is an introduction to display calibration. And one of the questions is, are you calibrating the displays that you install, and whether that's doing some basic adjustments that we'll cover today, or going full blown and spending, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours on the calibration. But again, I wanted to reiterate with everybody that it doesn't have to, take that much time, and you don't have to do, you don't have to spend lots and lots of money on equipment. In fact, what a lot of people don't know is that even on the Fox and Hound generator, there are a few test patterns that you can utilize. So if you don't have like a Murideo 6G with tons and tons of test patterns, you can still do some, I call it good damage, even with the Fox and Hound generator, at least setting the important things like white level and black level. So we'll get into it here. Just a quick introduction. My name's Jason. Been with Murideo now. I'm going on my 6th year. I've been calibrating since 2007, teaching the class since 2012. And as I mentioned to you guys before, this is kind of something near and dear to my heart. I grew up in this world as an enthusiast, and just one of those situations. I'm very lucky to be doing my hobby as a job, if you will. So with that being said, we've got some videos on YouTube that'll take you down that rabbit hole if you want to. But if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, or just Murideo in general, I'm really easy to find and really easy to get a hold of. It's just jason@murideo.com. So feel free, don't be shy if you have any specific questions. In case you're not familiar with Murideo, as Damien said, and very kindly, that we make HDMI test and measurement equipment. We were the first people to do an 18 gigabit per second generator back in 2015. We have a lot of customers out there on the planet who are using our stuff. And if you look us up on hdmi.org, we are an official test equipment manufacturer. So our products have been through the paces for not only putting test patterns on the screen, but also for troubleshooting. Okay, what is video calibration? Calibration in general, the general definition is matching a device to a standard. And a lot of times you might see not only in video situations like what we're going to talk about today, but when you calibrate a scale, for example, you know what 1 gram is in your guys' case over in the UK. So the scale may have to be calibrated every once in a while. Just one example, but there's lots. When we talk about calibration in the home theater sense, the best way to describe it is really taking what you know about imaging and about how our eyeballs work, and knowing the science behind it, and knowing when to use certain adjustments based on the display in the room. And, not every room is perfect. Not every display is perfect. So knowing how the display works, knowing what these adjustments and what these settings do, knowing what the test patterns are supposed to look like, and making your most intelligent set of compromises. A great example is, every once in a while, I'll see an OLED in a bright room, or I'll see an LED LCD in a really dark room. So there are different ways that you would treat those systems based on the room and based on where the customer sits. Calibration in general with TVs and projectors. And this is what's really important for you guys to know. You can make 5 or so adjustments in the TV and still make a very, very big difference. Once you get beyond that, it starts getting into things like color correction. But what I will tell you, the getting those 4 or 5 major adjustments set out of the box is really going to be about 75% of the work, 80% of the work. And that squeezing out that last 25 or 20% is, when you would want to use something like a light meter and software. But if we can get the bulk of it out of the way in 15 minutes, it's a massive improvement over how that display comes from the factory. And as you guys probably know, the manufacturers don't know the room that display is going to go into. In a projection system, they don't know the room and they don't know the screen that you're going to be lighting up. So they all come from the factory with the same generic presets and same generic adjustments. So, if we're doing custom installation and professional video and audio, we should at least be doing some of these basic things, but that's exactly what we'll talk about today. So why is calibration important? That little picture that you see up there on the screen is from a color grading suite at one of the major studios. So what you'll see in front of you are the DaVinci controls on the left and on the right, and those are flanking a professional color mastering monitor. That looks like, I think that's a Sony, most likely. It could be a Flanders or something. But the idea is the person who is color grading the movie and making these critical decisions on how they want this film or this video game or TV show or commercial or what have you look the way they want it to look from a creative point of view. They're looking at that mastering monitor. Now, the big problem is that, your mastering monitor, your TV at home or your projector in your theater room isn't matched up to that display. So when you're looking at a piece of content on your TV at home or your projector at home, there might be some details that you're missing. The skin tones might not look exactly right. A great example of this, and we've heard it twice now with 2 different Game of Thrones episodes, but not being able to see the shadows in the darker parts of the picture. And that's something that you can fix with some of the basic adjustments we'll talk about today. And behind that mastering monitor, you'll see what's called a client monitor. And that typically is going to be, in this case at least, it's an LG OLED. So when the colorist is making the image look the way they want it to look, they're not only looking at their mastering monitor, but they're also looking at a calibrated consumer monitor. And then behind that, there's also a screen, so they can take a look at some of these images on a projector as well. So a few things that we have to take into consideration here is we have to match the display to the source. And what that really means is if we know the display's capabilities and we know the source's capabilities, we want those things to match up. The most important thing to me is matching the system to the room. Every room is different. Sometimes the room is dark. Sometimes the room is bright. Sometimes you have rooms that could be either or, and we want to make that system perform its best. And we want that customer to get all the details out of that image, regardless of the room lighting. Getting the whole picture, in almost every case I can think of, at least with consumer televisions, there are some things that are going on with the geometry of the TV to where you're not getting 100% of the pixels. You're just getting a slightly cropped image. So we want to make sure you're getting the whole picture. We want to make sure you're getting the right picture, as I said, with shadow details and skin tones and bright details and overall clarity and stuff like that. And we want you to get nothing but the picture. So in other words, and a good audio analogy for this is, when you have an audio system that's set up really well, you don't hear the audio system. You don't hear the speakers. What you're actually listening to at that point is the music itself without any distractions from, a subwoofer that's rattling, for example. So we want you guys to get nothing but the picture, and we want that experience to be immersive, and we don't want the customer distracted by, orange skin tones, for example. So what's in it for the viewer? These are the biggest things that you can talk about when you're discussing this topic with your customer. The biggest, most important thing that we hear that's improved after calibration is getting more detail in the dark and bright parts of the picture. So you can think about a show like Game of Thrones that traditionally is pretty dark. You can think about scary movies. A lot of video games that tend to be pretty dark these days, and even a lot of TV shows that seem to be dark these days too. If you don't have some of these basic adjustments right, then you have this problem where the show looks too dark. And that also is true for the bright parts of the picture. So if you're watching something like Planet Earth and there's a polar bear sliding down the mountain, you want to be able to see the polar bear's details and the outline of their body. The last thing you want is for two black eyeballs sliding down the mountain in such a way that the polar bear's white fur is the same white as the snow on the mountain. So we want to get more bright details. We want to get more dark details. And speaking of dark and bright, we want to match the display to the room that it's in. If you put an LED LCD or a quantum dot LCD in a really dark room and make the TV super bright, that's going to take away from the from actually watching a movie or watching a TV show. And in a lot of cases, if the picture is too bright, we end up with customers getting headaches, and we don't want that for sure. Skin tones. One of the most important things to us humans is making sure the skin tones look correct. Skin tones are what we look at every day. We look at each other all the time. And if the skin tones are not right, it's very easy for us to spot. So for example, watching the news is a great example. If the skin tones are very over or undersaturated, things won't look right. If some of the color is off and the skin tones look kind of green or sort of yellowish, the person might look sick. So we want to make sure the skin tones are correct. We want the color to be accurate as it can be. A good example would be like a school bus. If a school bus is driving down the road and it's kind of green and not exactly the right yellow, then that's something that you'll notice too. For people who are big sports fans, if the team jerseys and team colors are not right, you'll most likely notice that as well. So we want the overall accuracy of the overall color of the image to be correct. We also want the picture to be as clear as possible. And what we mean by that is the resolution is correct, the sharpness is set correctly, the geometry of the display is set correctly, aspect ratios and all those fun things. In a projection system, we want to make sure that lens is focused, and all of these things added up, if they're correct, will give us the clearest picture possible. And if you're looking at film or video games or TV shows from an artistic standpoint, which we all tend to do, really should be doing, film is a form of art. We want to see that art as the creators intended. So a good example of this would be, you go to an art gallery and you're looking at a painting on the wall, and you look up into the ceiling and the light shining onto the painting is a very blue color white, a very bluish white. You're now altering your perception of that piece of art or that painting. And whoever painted that painting had a very specific look in mind when they did it. That's why they did it. So we want to see these we want to see these films in their original artistic intent as close as possible. Another good thing about this is it's completely custom. It's custom to the type of display. It's custom to where the customer sits. It's custom to the rest of the system and all the other components, because they have to be adjusted as well. And it's all custom based on, how we see images. So what's really nice about this, and a best practice that I like to recommend, is when you're making some of these visual adjustments and basic adjustments to the display, it's really great to have the customer in there with you, because their eyes might be slightly different than yours. So once you're looking at some of these test patterns and figuring out where some of these adjustments should be, it is completely custom based on them and their room, which I think is really fun. That makes it a little more special. You're not just randomly putting in settings. Now that we know what's in it for the customer, what's in it for the integrator? The number one thing is reoccurring revenue. What I tend to notice doing this for a long time is once somebody sees a TV or projector set up correctly, whether it's the basic settings or going full bore and spending lots and lots of time doing color correction, once somebody's used to seeing the picture correct and they get a new TV next year or a new projector next year, or however long away you want to say, they're going to want that new display recalibrated as well. If you're used to seeing it correct, all of a sudden you have a new TV and you can tell it's not correct anymore, you want it to be done. Me personally, I have tons and tons and tons of private clients who I won't hear from for 2 or 3 years. And all of a sudden I'll get a message from them that says, hey, I got a new TV. I need you to come over. So they already know what it's all about. Setup and maintenance. Any new display out of the box needs to have some basic adjustments to it. Again, as I mentioned before, the TVs come out of the box from the factory, all with the same generic settings. And in most cases these days, it's going to have a bunch of energy savings things turned on, which robs you of light output. All the motion stuff is cranked up, and I know we all know how weird that tends to look. So when you're setting up a new display, this stuff really should be done. General maintenance of the display. So in other words, if you have a projection system where there's a bulb, and the bulb has 2, 3, 4, 5,000 hours on it, it's time for a new bulb. You really need to be going in there and making some of these adjustments again, because a different bulb will give you different light output. And things do drift over time. There are lots of professional environments out there. In fact, some of the reference monitor manufacturers, they recommend that their monitors are recalibrated every 300 hours. And, you know, that sounds extreme for a home situation, but that just does give you an idea that, you know, this isn't just a set it up one time and forget it for the rest of the TV's life. If you guys go in there to do some maintenance, you might want to go in there and just say, hey, while I'm here, let's take a look at the TV and make sure it's still tuned up properly. Anything that changes in the system, you have to recheck things as well. So if the customer gets a new source, you have to make sure the source is set up correctly. If the customer gets a new AVR, you need to make sure that's set up correctly. So, you know, anything that changes in the system, you might have to touch it up a little bit, and that's okay. Another thing we noticed too is this is mainly, to be honest, this is mainly in a big box situation, but we see it a lot in private integrators. Once TVs are set up, even if it's just the things we'll talk about today, and the customer now understands what the picture is supposed to look like, then we almost always see in those situations that the integrator or the store gets less returns. A lot of the reasons for customers to return TVs are reasons that they were not educated on why the motion looks like that or why they can't see shadow details. And they just assume something is wrong with the TV and they return it. But if you go in there, you educate the customer, spend 15 minutes making these basic adjustments with them, looking at test patterns with them, you know, they tend to understand now why the picture looks the way it looks, and they're less likely to return the TV. Customer satisfaction, for me, for you guys at least, that's a big one. You know, if you're going through and you're taking this extra 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever, to get the customer involved to set up the TV, that's just one thing better that you're doing to compared to the next integrator. So it's just all part of customer service. Another thing that we see too a lot, this happened to me kind of recently, and I thought it was pretty funny. I was in a very wealthy neighborhood down in South Florida, and I went to a person's house. I calibrated his projector. Next thing you know, I get a phone call from his neighbor a month later, and he says, hey, I saw, you know, so-and-so's projector. It looked really good. I need you to come over and take care of mine too. Mine doesn't look as good as his. So that's always fun to hear those phone calls as well. Also, you get online advertising. So if you do go through something like the ISF course, you are put on the website as being certified, and you do tend to get calls that way. And then if you do go through the ISF course, you're also free to use all those logos and things like that. So when you're putting things on your website or putting decals on the side of your vehicle, you can certainly advertise that you guys do this type of work. So any questions so far, Damien?
Just one about charging and what's typically kind of price points, but I think we'll come to that at the end.
Yeah, we'll mention that at the end. Awesome question. Is that the only one so far?
Only one so far. So you're obviously not bamboozled anyone yet.
Okay, good. Guys, don't be shy. Again, we're all here to learn. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask. So what we have to start off with first is we have to define picture quality. And actually, this might be a good question for the group. Damien, I don't know if you can put this question in or maybe just take some answers. But when you talk about picture quality with somebody, or you're judging a TV or projector based on picture quality, what are you actually looking for? So I would love to see some of those answers. So feel free to type those in. And I'll give you a hint. It's not all about the resolution, and it's not all about how bright the image can be. A good example of that, and we talk about images being too bright, is, you know, are the loudest speakers on the planet necessarily the best sounding? They might be the loudest, but they might not sound very good. And there's lots and lots and lots and lots of instances out there where a TV or a projector can be set up to where it's very bright, but the picture still looks very bad. So it's not all about that. Damien, did you get any answers yet?
We've had black level.
Perfect. That's excellent. That's an awesome observation. That's an important one. And we'll actually spend a little more time talking about black level. That's very, very important. Someone
else has come in with how natural the image looks.
Awesome. I love that one too. That's fantastic.
What else? Another for natural should be like looking through a window.
Love it.
Angus has come up with color accuracy.
Good. These are all fantastic answers. I appreciate that, guys. Skin tones. Yeah. Good. So when we break it down, like what picture quality actually means, there's really four things to it. And this isn't something that we all sat around a room one day and said, hey, this is how we should qualify. This is how we should talk about picture quality. It's these four things. That's not the case at all. We came up with these four things based on how our eyes work as human beings. If you guys, have ever gone sort of into how your eyeballs work, You may have come across some information about your retinas and rods and cones, and there's a lot of biology and science behind this. And the 4 things that we talk about when we talk about picture quality are all based on how we see. So when we talk about picture quality, the number one most important thing, and somebody had mentioned black levels, and this is tied to that. The number one most important thing to us is dynamic range, which is also known as contrast. And what that really is the difference between the brightest and the darkest parts of the picture. The more contrast you have, the better the image looks. So if you can think about putting a projector in a living room, there's not going to be much contrast in there. But if you take an OLED and put it into a dark room, there's lots of contrast there. So we have to optimize this display in such a way that it has the most contrast as possible for the room that it's in. So contrast is everything. After contrast is color saturation, and that really goes back to skin tones for the most part. There's more to it too. But how colorful is the image? If there's too much color, things can look weird and cartoony. If there's not enough color, the picture can look washed out. So color saturation is about the amount of color. Another good example is, we just went through the World Cup, and the grass should look natural and not neon green. That's usually a color saturation issue. Number 3 is colorimetry. That's a very fancy way of saying overall color accuracy. I think the example I used before was a school bus. We want that school bus to be its natural, almost orangish sort of yellow color, and not like a greenish yellow. Our Murideo purple, for example, is a very specific purple. If that looks like a bluish purple, the accuracy is wrong. And then number 4, probably the most surprising thing to most people who are learning this for the first time, is the resolution. That's the overall detail, the overall clarity of the image. And that takes people for a surprise sometimes, because from a marketing standpoint, when you're buying a TV, that's usually the thing that they concentrate on the most is, at first it was, hey, we have 720p and 1080i. Great. Okay, now we have 4K. Awesome. Now we're going to 8K. The HDMI 2.1 spec goes up to 10K. So you could have all the resolution in the world, but if the display is not optimized to take advantage of that resolution, you might have a high resolution display that's also still blurry. So we have to talk about these things, and we have to look at some test patterns to get them right. So screenshot this. I'll provide it in a PDF if you'd like after we're done. But this really is the big 4 things that we should be talking about when we're talking about picture quality and how we judge images on a display. Okay, as I said, with dynamic range, it's the difference between dark and bright. Here's the problem. You could have a display that makes really dark black levels and really bright white levels, but you still could be missing details in the darkest and brightest parts of the picture. So if you take a look at these 2 images on the screen, this is a very simple grayscale pattern. And if you look at the image on the left, the top left part of that test pattern, there should be different shades of white and gray in those rectangles or those bars, and you have 1 shade of white. So looking at a cloud in the sky, it's all going to be blurred together. You're not going to see the details and the puffiness, if you will, in the clouds. And to the other extreme, there should be multiple rectangles on the dark end, but instead of multiple rectangles or bars, you have 1 big bar of black. And this goes back to that Game of Thrones thing, to where if your black levels aren't correct, then you're not going to see shadows and dark details in the picture. And if you look at that same grayscale pattern on the right, you'll see that all the details are preserved. White is still white, black is still black, and you can see everything in between. That's what we're going for when we set up white level and black level. Number 2, color saturation. I sort of mentioned this before. The middle example of this test image is perfect. It's exactly how it should be. Now, I do have to stress the importance of this, and I do have to mention this. If you're looking at this presentation or looking at this slide right now on a TV or a monitor that's in some sort of like vivid mode, that middle picture is probably going to look very overly bright and overly saturated. But just to land the point here, there shouldn't be too much color where people look orange and the skin tones look funky. There shouldn't be too little color to where everybody looks pale and sick. There should be the right amount of color so that all the skin tones look natural. And I know somebody mentioned before natural skin tones when we talked about what you think is picture quality, and that's exactly right. Skin tones are the most important thing when we talk about color saturation. But there's also things in nature, and there's also food and stuff like that. If your tomatoes on Food Network are glowing red, then that might need to be addressed. Things aren't going to look very natural. And again, the other common example, which we've used for years and years and years because we see it all the time, is neon green grass when you watch sports. Another great example of oversaturated color. Here I've got a picture of Kobe Bryant from the LA Lakers. And in this particular slide, we talk about color accuracy. The example on the right is actually correct. And this is with a good white balance. If anybody listening to this takes any photos or gets into photography at all, you know how important the white balance is to make the image look natural. If the white balance on the TV is off, then you run into the same problem. So if you compare these two images, the one on the right is correct. The one on the left, there's way too much blue in the grayscale. And you can really see that. If you look at the top of Kobe's head, where there's a reflection off of his head or off of his left shoulder, you can see that those bright details are blue. Also, if you look in the background, you can see a lot of people in the audience who are wearing white clothing, and you can also tell that there's too much blue. And another thing that stands out here too is in the bottom right, you have a very specific shade of purple. It's like a Lakers purple. And on the one on the left, it's a much lighter shade of purple compared to the one on the right. So color accuracy, when we talk about that, these are the types of things that you'll see. And again, sports is a very good example. Things in nature, food, we want those things to be the correct color. And then last but not least is your overall resolution, the detail that's available in the image, the overall clarity of the image itself. So of course, this one's pretty obvious. The image on the right has the sharpness and the focus set correctly. And the image on the left, things are much more blurry and you can't see any of the details in the tree and in the grass and in the leaves and those types of things. Also, the picture can be overly sharpened. So when you look at details like in the tree, things are overly sharpened and you end up with the opposite problem to where you have a bunch of artificial edge enhancement and the sharpness is turned up really high, which sounds like it's right, but it's actually not. And again, you could have lots of resolution and still have a blurry, hard to see image. Okay, so what tools are needed to do this? What we're going to talk about first is a test pattern generator. Now, what you see on the screen up there is the Murideo 6G. That's the famous one. That's what most calibrators use. But as I said before, you can get test patterns from the Fox and Hound. Our website, murideo.com, we have some free test patterns that will help you with this stuff. Free downloads. You can put it onto a thumb drive if you'd like to. Plug the thumb drive into a streaming device or straight into the TV, and you can look at some very simple test patterns. That's really what we're going to talk about the most today. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole and start talking about color correction and going all in on this, you need your test pattern generator. You would need a light meter. You would need some form of software, and we have multiple to choose from. And then you want to have some sort of demo material. Now, I will say as well, even if we're doing basic adjustments with the Fox and Hound or with some free downloaded test patterns, you still want to have some demo material. So whether that's some really high quality content on a disc, or if you have some ideas in your mind about some really good high quality looking content on Netflix or Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing you want to do is look at some test patterns, but not verify with real images that everything went to plan. So just a little quick idea there on everything you would need if you were going to go all in on this. But again, we're just going to talk about some of the easy test patterns today. If you do want to get certified through every level of ISF, we can certainly help you with that. We also work with another company called PVA. It's the Professional Video Alliance. ISF tends to concentrate a little bit more on some residential and commercial installations, such as video walls and airports, and of course, residential environments. The PVA course is lots of fun. It's very, very good. But that course is taught by a gentleman named Greg Lowen. And he does talk a lot about like residential TVs and things like that, but he deals a lot more with the professional side of things. So like Hollywood colorists and folks like that. But there are 2 different classes you can attend if you want to go all in on this and get certified through every single level for calibration. So going back to one thing that I hear a lot of is when I set up a TV or a projector, I set it up to where I think it looks good. And I like that because it's better than leaving it factory, but we have to understand what adjustments you're making, why you're making them, and what test patterns, how the test patterns should actually look when you're making the adjustment. A good example of this is, maybe you turn on a news channel and you're looking at skin tones and the skin tones are way oversaturated. So you turn down the saturation control and then you go to another channel and things look way undersaturated. So we have to think about the content itself and how that's actually made. And eyeballing it doesn't really help us in those situations. So a nice little quote here I like to throw in, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not his own facts. So when we're talking about test patterns, these are ITU compliant. They're used by SMPTE, they're used by THX. These are all over the planet, the standardized test patterns that we use to make some of these adjustments. So whether you're watching a movie here in the US or in Europe or in India, et cetera, we're all using the same test patterns. We're all using the same standards. If I watch a movie here, like Avatar just came out, and I go watch Avatar in Canada, they should look exactly the same. So this is all standardized across the globe. A few misconceptions about calibration. And this is really good information for you guys and also for your customers, because we do hear this pushback from customers too who've looked into this stuff. But some TVs are not worth calibrating because they don't have a color management system. And a color management system in a TV gives the calibrator the ability to go in and fine tune each individual primary and secondary color in the menu. And a lot of TVs don't offer that. So sometimes people will say, well, the TV doesn't have color management, so it's not worth calibrating. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because the color management system does not address white level, black level, color saturation, color accuracy, sharpness. This is color correction. And that's great if you do that, but you don't have to do that to make a very positive difference to the picture. Motion flow makes the picture look better. I don't know about you guys. I hate it. I typically turn it off. At the end of the day, it's up to the customer. It's their TV. They have to live with it. But being able to explain what the motion flow does. One thing that I notice is I have a lot of stories I've heard in the past about customers returning the TV because it looked like the movie was shot with a video camera. And I'm sure you guys have heard plenty of that yourselves. Another misconception about HDR, there are no standards for HDR. There absolutely are standards for HDR. How that manufacturer of that display implements that is up to them, but there are standards for HDR. And again, if black levels and white levels are not correct, even in HDR, we're going to be missing parts of the picture. So there's no reason to not do some basic adjustments just because you're looking at something in HDR. There's still some advantages. You might also see in a lot of TVs, consumer TVs especially, LGs are a good example, Epson projectors, JVC projectors, Panasonic TVs. The list is very long. And these TVs will have ISF modes. So one thing that we hear a lot of, and I see this a lot online too, people say, oh, this TV's ISF certified. That means it's calibrated from the factory. And that is completely not correct at all. When you see a TV that has the ISF logo, that means that the TV offers a picture mode to calibrate. So in other words, if you look at a lot of TVs and you put them in vivid mode or game mode, THX mode in some cases, you can't make many, if any, adjustments at all to that television. But if the TV has an ISF certification, that means that that display is going to give you a picture mode with a menu system that does have all the adjustments that you need to calibrate the TV. Now, are those modes closer to the reference and to the standard from the factory based on other picture modes? Sure. If you look at, say, vivid or standard or energy savings mode on TVs, that's a really bad place to start. Too many things have to be turned off. Some things might not be adjustable at all. It ends up causing way more work than what is necessary. So when you see those ISF modes on TVs, that means there is at least one mode in the TV to calibrate, and it gives you a much good starting point to make these adjustments. Another one I hear, which is really kind of mind-blowing to me, but it is still a thing, is, oh, calibration, that was only for CRT TVs. We don't have to do that anymore. And every time I hear that, it really makes me wonder what's going on, because I mean, at the beginning of this, yes, we were doing CRT TVs and we were aligning CRT, we were aligning red, green, and blue, and there was a lot more mechanics to it. But if calibration was only for CRT TVs, then why on earth would a current TV or a modern TV have a menu with 100+ adjustments in it? These TVs are designed to be calibrated. It's not just for CRT TVs. Now, what you would do to a CRT to calibrate it compared to a modern TV, yes, those things are completely wildly different. But we're talking about modern displays. They have tons of adjustments. Again, I'll reiterate this one more time. They don't know where the TV is going to go, a bright room, dark room, etc. So they give us the adjustments to make these to make these TVs really look good in the room that they're in. TVs and projectors are good enough out of the box. I hear this a lot. Now, if we're comparing this to a TV or a projector 5 years ago or longer, then there is some truth to that. They're much better than they were out of the box compared to in years past. But here's the problem. They're not perfect by any means. Again, they don't know the room that the display is going to go into. So the black level is not going to be right. The white level's probably not going to be right. The color balance is probably not going to be right. The sharpness is probably not going to be right. So even though these modern displays are much better out of the box than they were in the past, then they still need to be touched up, even if it's lightly. And then last but not least, again, this is only the big ones. There's lots more out there, but OLED TVs don't need calibration. I don't know where this came from. I do hear this a lot, and it just makes me scratch my head, because what would make a specific technology not need to be calibrated compared to another technology? I don't understand that, but I do hear it. But again, it all goes back to the same things we've already talked about before. We need to match the TV to the room, whether that's an OLED or a projector or a CRT or whatever the case is. This is just a screenshot of an LG TV with an ISF picture mode. They do ISF day and night. So this is nice because your customer now has two options. If the room is bright, they can use the day mode. If the room is dark, they can use the night mode. But they are not calibrated from the factory. And one good example is if you look at this specific screenshot, if you look down a few lines, the brightness is set to 52 because this was this was a brighter room. This wasn't a cave where everything was completely dark. So even though we used the ISF modes, we still had to make some adjustments so we could see shadow details. So keep that in mind. If somebody says, oh, I don't need this TV calibrated, it has an ISF mode, you just have to make sure that we understand that that's not what that means. In a lot of cases too, with TVs that do have the ISF modes, I think a really cool feature of that is the picture mode can be locked. So the customer can't go in there and accidentally change what you adjusted or accidentally hit reset and things like that. Okay, the end goal of a calibration is picture accuracy is really what we talk about the most, and getting all the details in the picture. Those are really the two big things. So I wanted to show you some screenshots here of some pre and post calibration with a modern TV. I'm not going to name the name, but when we look at the left side of the screen, we're looking at a graph that shows you the grayscale. And what the grayscale is, we looked at a test pattern before, and that's the level of dark to bright. So if we look across the bottom of this chart, it starts off at 10, which is almost black, and then 100 is pure white. And in this particular case, the grayscale of this TV was way blue. You see the blue goes off the charts, red and green go down here. We want those red, green, blue lines to track right around 100 to be correct. With the gamma down here, the gamma is a room correction tool for bright and dark. And when we look at the gamma here for this uncalibrated factory out-of-the-box TV, I think this was in the energy savings mode, if I remember correctly, on this particular TV. The gamma was way out of whack. You see this big scoop right here. You have all kinds of problems seeing shadow detail and bright detail when you get this kind of result. And if you look at post-calibration, we have a nice flat grayscale response, a nice flat gamma response. This is a good achievement right here for this TV. If we look over here on the color gamut, just in a very simple way to explain this, the triangle that you see right here is the color points that we're aiming for, in this case, high definition TV. So you can see that the green is way out here, which causes that weird neon grass issue. The Jason, white point, yes, sir.
Sorry, have you got a laser pointer on your mouse?
Oh,
it's just a
I
little,
thought I thought I did, but let me just check in case. Thank you for letting me know. Any questions while I'm pulling this up?
We can just about see it moving around, but it's not totally clear.
How about that?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay,
perfect.
Awesome. Thank you for letting me know.
No
so just
problem.
to go back, the grayscale here is really blue. The gamma correction's a total mess. Over here, we have a much better result for both of those. The color gamut over here, we have green, way out. So again, neon green grass. The white point, instead of in the middle, is down here towards blue. So that gives us those weird bluish skin tones and things that we looked at in that picture of Kobe Bryant. You can see that cyan is way too blue, magenta is way too blue. So when you look at an image on the screen, it looks completely wrong and strange. On the right side of the screen here, we have a calibrated image, and you can see all the color points are now on target. So when you take this grayscale, this gamma, add it to this color gamut, that's when we start talking about color accuracy. Now, as we're talking about the basic adjustments, you can get pretty darn close to these if you know what adjustments to make and you know what you're looking for. Will it be absolutely perfect? No, but as I mentioned before, you'll be about 80% of the way there. That last 20% is where you start using software and light meters and really squeezing out that last bit. But again, you can get pretty darn close to this just with making some basic adjustments. So what is the end goal? As far as images go, we looked at graphs and that's all great, but what does it look like in real life? So this was hockey I went to with a buddy of mine, Tampa Bay Lightning, which is, believe it or not, a very popular hockey team, which Florida, you would think not, but they've done really well for the past 2 years. But as you're looking at this picture, my eyes saw white ice, my camera saw white ice. But if you look at the Jumbotron up here, it's purple. So hopefully in a perfect case scenario, that would match. That's obviously a very commercial type environment. Down at the bottom, this is a video wall at my airport that I fly in and out of all the time. And hopefully you can see this on your screen, but we have different screens here. Some are a little bit brighter. This one, for example, is a little bit brighter than that one and that one. Down here, the grayscale on these panels is way more blue than the others. So none of these panels really match up very well. It just looks weird. So if you're doing video walls in somebody's home, which I've seen a lot lately, or you're doing a video wall in a commercial environment, then this kind of stuff can be fixed. On the right side of the screen, you'll see a picture I took of a projector in a home theater system. And I wanted to kind of compare some of the presets to what it should look like. So in this particular projector, there's a setting called living room, which I would equate to vivid mode or dynamic mode. Now, the background of this screenshot should be white. And obviously in the living room mode, it is way out of whack. And it's this very greenish, almost cyan type of color. That makes the picture look really, really, really bad. On the opposite end of that, you have the THX mode in this projector, which is allegedly the most accurate one out of the box. But instead of a white background, we have a yellow background. And this really does a lot of damage to skin tones. It makes people look sick, and it's just really weird. And imagine you're watching hockey and the ice is this color or this color. You're going to notice that right away on your TV. Once the image is set up correctly and calibrated to the correct white point, you get a nice pure white. Now the rest of the color is accurate, and you're seeing the movie more like what the directors and cinematographers and colorists had intended. Now, again, you can get pretty close to correct white with the basic preset adjustments in the TV. But again, you have to know what you're looking for. And in this particular case, these last couple of examples that we've looked at, you could actually do some of this with the Fox and Hound. Again, and there's also free test patterns you can download from our website. We talked a little bit about calibrating components. This is just an example. And what I wanted to point out here, these are two screenshots of what we like to call gamma in two different ways. And what gamma is, it's a room correction tool to adjust white level and black level together to match the room lighting. So what's going on here? So in a perfect scenario, if you look at the one on the right, we have a nice flat gamma response. So whether that room is bright or dark, you're going to see details in the shadows and in the bright parts. If you look at the image on the left, that was the same reading, but going through an AVR. It was going through a receiver, and the receiver was altering the gamma correction. So if you had your test patterns on the screen with your generator or your test pattern on a USB stick straight into the television, you got a nice flat response. But as soon as you looked at that same test pattern through a AVR, you got this. And the reason I wanted to reiterate this is because there are adjustments you can make in the AVR to stop these things from happening. So what we commonly see in an AVR is something like a pass-through mode, or you can turn video processing off. Those are just some of the common examples. But if you turn those things off or put it into a pass-through mode, the AVR is no longer altering the image that's coming through, and you go back to this nice flat response. So as we talk about making adjustments to the TV or projector, don't forget that there are other components in the system that might need to be looked at. Okay, so just to recap, what is calibration? Matching the video system to a known standard. Test patterns, black levels, white levels, sitting with your customer, knowing the room lighting, knowing the room environment, how far away the customer sits. These are all the things we talk about when we're calibrating displays. Why is it important? The biggest thing for me is matching the system to the room. It's just like audio. You could take the nicest audio system, the nicest speakers in the world, and you put them in a bathroom with tile floors and tile walls and this and that, not going to sound good. A living room with no rugs and concrete floors, same example, you guys get the idea. And getting the right image. Again, we look at these things from an artistic standpoint, whether it's film or video games or whatever, and we want to make sure that image looks as close to that as possible. I'll give you another good example. There's a show on Netflix called Ozark, which I love, and a lot of us have probably seen it. It's been out for a while. And Ozark has this very cold, bluish gray look to it. So if you're watching Ozark and your projector looks like this, that image no longer looks anywhere remotely close to how it was supposed to look. So just an example, but there's lots and lots of TV shows and movies out there that have sort of a look to them, and we want to preserve that as much as possible. For the viewer, again, seeing all the details in the image as much as possible and seeing that content as it was intended to be seen. And what's in it for you guys? You get repeat business. And my biggest thing for the integrator, this is all about customer service. And I've done this plenty of times for plenty of years. When you get that customer sitting next to you and you say, okay, we're going to look at this test pattern together, and I'm going to make this adjustment, and I want you to tell me when you see X, Y, and Z in that test pattern. And that's where that specific adjustment needs to be set to based on this room and where you sit and your eyes. So this is very custom. It's based on your customer, and getting them involved, I think, is really special because, now they know that the picture is correct for them. And Damien, with that being said, I think we made pretty good time. That's all I have as far as slides go. We do have some resources for you guys to check out. Murideo.com. That's where you can download some free test patterns. Our phone number's up there in case you need it. I've got a lot of this stuff on our YouTube channel. In fact, if you want to go to our YouTube channel, we even stream some test patterns on our YouTube channel. So if you're looking at maybe the customer uses a streaming device as their main source, you can go to the Murideo YouTube channel and you won't have to download any test patterns or have a test pattern generator. You can do it from the YouTube channel, which is super helpful. Our Twitter is up there. Our Facebook is up there. Instagram is up there. We post a lot of this information on all of our social media, lots of tips and tricks. So if you want to follow us there, that's how you can. info@murideo.com if you have any kind of generic questions that we can help you with, or if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm an open door. My job is to support you guys and help you out, and I'm happy to do it. If you want to email me directly, it's jason@murideo.com. So Damien, what do we have for questions?
Thank you, Jason. I am back. So we've got a couple of questions. So thank you for all of that content so far there. What I'm going to do is I am just going to, before we jump into the questions, if I just take control back a second. There we go. And I'm just going to touch on to some of those things that you have just been talking about.
Sure.
This one here. So as Jason said, obviously, we do count, there is a full range of tools.
Sure.
If you're just doing the 15 minutes, as we say, and you just want to try and improve. So this is the Murideo.com website, and up here under resources.
Oh, perfect. I just pulled that up myself to show people, but you're ahead of me. That's great.
Is the test pattern library. And so in here, so as Jason was showing, especially with the grayscale one, that one, you can pull these up, you can save these off, you can put these onto a drive or a stick, or as Jason said, there's on your YouTube channel.
There's all the download links too, right there on the bottom of that page. Yeah, you can do them in various resolutions as well.
Excellent. So these are the things that are going to let you just, if I understand this right, let you, as you say, pull these up on the screen and basically start working with the settings that are there in the system.
Right.
So one of the questions that kind of leads on to this is, if you were doing current TV, LG, Samsung, whoever,
right,
what setting would be the one that you automatically in every install turn off? What is the one that is the killer?
So I wrote an article on this, and I'm more than happy to share that link with you guys. But the article I wrote was basically the top things that I would advise a friend of mine to do when they get a new TV. So, and this happens to me a lot, and probably you guys too, but a friend or family member calls up and says, hey, I just got a new TV. It looks weird. What should I do to it? And when people say it looks weird, most of the time that has something to do with motion. They might say it looks too dark, and that has to do with energy savings. So these are the two things that I eliminate right off the bat. When you look at an LG OLED, great example. The LG OLED comes in its energy savings mode. It's called APS, Auto Power Save. And it's very dim. The manufacturer wants to get their Energy Star compliant, certification. And if you guys in Europe, in the UK, I'm not sure if it's like that there, but it's like this here, to where, when you're looking at a TV from the manufacturer, whether it's on the wall in a store or you take it out of the box, it's brand new, there's always this yellow sticker on the bezel that says, this TV is going to cost you $9 a year to run. And that's great. We want efficient devices, whether they're TVs or dishwashers or whatever. But they're assuming that based off of their power saving mode. So they do things to that picture mode to get that number as low as possible. And that means dimming the picture. And when they dim the picture, they do some things to compensate, like oversaturate and make the grayscale super blue. So the very first thing that I recommend to people is getting out of the energy savings mode and turning off anything related to that. So a lot of TVs might have like an ambient light sensor. You want to turn that off. And for LG OLED specifically, there are lots of picture modes in those TVs that will give you a great starting point. So you have the two ISF modes, ISF bright, ISF dark. You have a cinema mode, which is very similar. In fact, if I'm calibrating a TV for somebody and they don't need a day mode because they're in a pitch black room all the time, even my TV at home, I didn't calibrate a day mode because I don't need it. But you can use something like cinema mode. You could use filmmaker mode. If the LG is a little bit older and it had Technicolor, you could use the Technicolor mode. So you might potentially in that TV have 3, 4, you have several options to pick from when you're picking a picture mode to start with. Now, the really good news is if you put it into one of those better modes out of the box, it's really just going to be some minor touch-ups. And this is where the whole 15-minute concept comes from. If you put a TV into ISF mode or cinema mode, most cases, it'll automatically turn the energy savings off, but you still want to check it. The touch-ups from there are going to be things like brightness, contrast, color, tint, sharpness. So number one, let's turn off energy savings mode and get it into a better picture mode. If you do get it into a better picture mode, that might default to energy savings off, which is really cool. You want to turn off motion processing unless your customer likes it. How do you know your customer likes it? Well, show it to them with the feature turned off and on and let them decide. Or if you have a more technical customer, a little geekier, if you will, you might want to show them where that adjustment is in the TV so they can turn it off and on at will. I don't like it. I'm a purist. I like it off. That's just me. But you can't tell the customer, hey, it has to be like this. Show it to them with it off and on and let them decide. And to that point as well, just like with energy savings, in most cases, when you go into a cinema mode or ISF mode, that will by default have the energy savings and the motion processing turned off as well. And in other cases, other manufacturers, your best starting point is most likely going to be some kind of mode that's worded cinema or theater or movie or something along those lines. Filmmaker mode is a very popular thing right now. Filmmaker mode is kind of interesting because if you look at filmmaker mode, cinema mode, ISF dark, these 3, 4 modes, they're all exactly the same from the factory. They give you the same adjustments. They look the same. They just have different use cases. So like filmmaker mode, like the ISF mode, it's a great starting point. But what's really cool about filmmaker mode is it's an automatic picture mode. So in other words, if you're watching a piece of content and it has a filmmaker mode flag in the content, the TV will automatically switch over to filmmaker mode for that movie. But then when you play a video game and there's no filmmaker mode flag in a video game, of course, then the TV will go back to whatever mode you're using for video games. So if you put it into filmmaker mode, you can then rely on the TV to automatically switch to filmmaker mode when it needs to be in filmmaker mode. Now, with that being said, ideally, we're watching all of our content in filmmaker mode because, again, those are the closest ones out of the box, et cetera, et cetera. You might want to just use filmmaker mode and turn off the automatic on-off switch and just leave it filmmaker mode all the time. So that's another thing I would do. So just to recap, get it out of the energy savings mode, turn off any ambient light sensors or anything related to energy, star stuff at all, get into a better picture mode, one that's more accurate out of the box anyway, and turn off your motion processing. Those are the 3 or 4 things I would do right off the bat. Now, beyond that, I would look at some of these test patterns, whether it's Fox and Hound or downloaded or streaming YouTube, or maybe you have a 6G. We want to look at the 5 major adjustments. So number 1, black level. Number 2, white level. Number 3, color saturation. Number 4, hue or tint. And number 5 will be like your sharpness control or your aspect ratio control. So one more time, take it out of energy savings, turn off any energy saving stuff, turn off motion processing, and then brightness, contrast, color, tint, sharpness. So there's 8 things you can do right there in 15 minutes or less to make a much better experience than how that TV or display comes out of the box. So I hope that answered your questions. If you have any follow-up, feel free.
Yep, that was a good point there. Let's see what else we've got here. Question from Chris. Is something like a Spears and Munsell calibration disc still any use as an intermediate, i.e. cheaper customer option if they don't want to spend on a full calibration?
Absolutely. The Spears and Munsell disc is fantastic. There's lots of great test patterns. So if you do have that disc, you can use that disc for these test patterns that you would maybe normally get from a Fox and Hound, or maybe you would normally get as a download from our website. The Spears and Munsell disc has plenty of test patterns for those things that we just talked about. Now, the only thing I would be careful with this on is you're putting all of your trust into the rest of the system. So if your Blu-ray player isn't set up correctly, the test patterns aren't going to look right no matter what you do. If the AVR is not set up correctly, you run into the same problem. And I'll just give you a good example. I'm a big fan of the Oppo Blu-ray players. I have 2 of them at home. And every single one I've ever had to deal with in my life, I had to bring the black level in the Oppo up 1 click. So what happens if you don't do that? So imagine you're trying to look at something like the Spears and Munsell black level pattern, but the Blu-ray player is already crushing the black level. You go to the TV and you're looking at this test pattern and you're turning up the black level and you can never see it correctly. So the Blu-ray player is sort of the offender in this case. So yes, you can absolutely use a disc. If you do, just make sure that disc player and anything in between the player and the TV are set up correctly before you do it.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess that comes back to kind of your point in your slides about the AVR.
Yes.
You could do it at the screen, get that perfect, but if something else in the signal path affects it, then you've got to work your way back through the signals there. And
in that example of the AVR was severely clipping the white level. So again, you look at the white level test pattern from your generator or from your thumb drive or from your Spears and Munsell disc, the white level going into the TV is already severely clipped. So there's nothing you can do to the TV to fix it. And what's really interesting is we reached out to the manufacturer of that AVR and we said, guys, well, what's going on here? Like, why would you do this? And they said, oh, well, you know, marketing wanted us to be able to say, oh, this, our AVR makes the picture brighter. It's better because it's brighter. Meanwhile, the whites are all completely clipped. And that was just a marketing decision. Of course, the engineer is like, I don't know why we did this, but marketing rules. And that's just the world we live in.
Absolutely. Another good one here from Chris. Do you need to configure each input, or are all the settings applied across all inputs?
Excellent question. And there's multiple answers for this. So pardon the long answer to a simple question. Sometimes. So we'll use the LG OLED as an example because that's the popular one right now. When you make these adjustments to an LG OLED, there's a menu item at the very bottom that says apply to all inputs. So boom, you hit that button. Now every single adjustment you made in that picture mode will translate over to all the other inputs. So if you make adjustments in filmmaker mode in HDMI 1 and press apply to all inputs, when you go to HDMI 2 and put that into filmmaker mode, all of your settings that you just did in HDMI 1 will copy over to HDMI 2. So that makes it super simple. In other situations, you might have to adjust each input individually, but no fret there, no worry. If you make these 5 to 8 basic adjustments, just write them down or take a picture of the menu with your phone. And then when you go to the next HDMI input, use the same picture mode as the previous HDMI input, but then just, plug in or put in the settings that you had written down or taken a picture of. And in some other cases, Panasonic Plasmas come to mind, and some Sonys do this too. But if you are in cinema mode and you make adjustments to cinema mode and then go to another HDMI input and put that into cinema mode, all your settings will be there. So they skip over the whole concept of pushing apply to all inputs like LG does. So it's really up to the manufacturer and how they implement this stuff. But worst case scenario, write down your settings, go to the next input, put those settings in, and boom, you're there. Perfect.
Let's just check the questions in the chat here. Chats. Someone mentioning that, the Game of Thrones example you made at the start is perfect. The parents have got the OLED Sony A9, but in a Spanish apartment where the room can be very bright.
Oh, yeah.
To show the details in the dark scenes, how natural the image looks. I'm not going to say his name, but he's been in the industry a little while because he can remember calibrating a lot of CRTs.
Oh boy, yeah. I haven't touched. The last time I touched luckily for me, I came into this at the tail end of CRTs because if we're going to be honest about this, they're a nightmare. And the last CRT that I even touched was probably 2007 or 8. So luckily we don't see that anymore. And I do want to just touch on one thing really quick if I can with this whole Game of Thrones thing.
Yeah.
As you guys know, the internet exploded the morning after, the evening during that show, I should say, and the next day, of course. And it was it's such a compelling example that when we do these TV shootouts and these projector shootouts, I just did a projector shootout a few weekends ago in New York City, where we put all of the projectors next to each other from entry-level price all the way to high-end price. And we tune them all the same, as close as we can at least. And we look at different, we have judges come in and we look at different clips from different movies, and they're judging the picture quality based on shadow details and bright details and most of the stuff that we talked about today. And that Game of Thrones thing is because everybody watches it, everybody at least knows about it. So in season 5, episode 3, The Long Night, I think it's called, where there was that big battle scene with all the zombie creature things, I used that clip in the shootout. And guess what? On every single one of those projectors, you could see the bad guys. But the second you go to a factory mode or you turn the black level down back to this factory position where it's too low, then all of a sudden the things are gone. So in that particular case where somebody's in the Spanish home, you're going to set your black level in that environment way different than you would set it, say, in a dark bedroom. But excellent point.
Yeah, I think I saw a video that it might have been one of yours, Jason, where there was a test pattern on screen from I think it was a projector.
Yeah.
And then but all the blacks looked a little bit grey.
Yeah.
And then they slid a curtain all the way along the room to block off the windows. And the blacks on the screen went completely black, as sort of, similar to your background or your t-shirt there.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. What's that?
Was that your video on YouTube?
That was a video that I had shared, and I wanted to share it because I thought the way they did it was very clever. A lot of times apartments or homes or whatnot, they don't have a dedicated space for a theater, so they want to turn their living room into a theater. And I love that idea. But the problem is in a living room is you have white walls and a white ceiling and windows and this and that. So they built this sort of curtain system to where when they did want to watch a movie, they were able to pull the curtain and they were able to block off the windows and such and the white walls on the left and right. But they also fashioned it in such a way that when they pulled the curtain, there was also a black piece of cloth that covered the white ceiling in front of the screen. And to your point, as soon as they pulled that curtain back, all of a sudden the black rectangles in the checkerboard pattern got black. And what's really the simplistic way to explain this? When the room is darker, you get better contrast.
I'll find a link to that and we'll share that at the end of this session, because I think that goes a long way towards what we've been talking about here.
It's a simple, cool example.
Yeah. I'll come to Jason's question in a moment. Someone's saying they were at a customer last week who had a coffee table made out of a CRT projector.
That's cool.
One of the early questions that I said I'd come back to was, how much would you charge for a full calibration of a television or a projector? And I'm going to expand on that if I can, Jason. I know.
Go first, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I think you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and I think you said, and that's what started us with this whole conversation, I think, was that you'd had a call to go to I don't know, as a family friend or someone, or whether it was a client, and you did the kind of the quick change. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we know that you do a lot of calibration to the far end. So do you want to just touch a little? Obviously, your pricing is going to be dollars, but it carries across. If you're you're happy to share some of that information, just kind of on on where this sort of fits into a business from a business perspective. That'd be great.
So there's really two levels of this, as you just mentioned. There's kind of like the basic optimization or the quick one, and then there's also the full blown one. And really, for me, what it comes down to is time. So I'll give you two extreme examples. I had somebody reach out to me. A local dealer had installed their TV and sound system in a condo on the 20th floor downtown here in one of these really pretty condos with big windows overlooking the water, and et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, man, I'm not quite happy with how it looks and how it sounds. I found your name online. Can you come over? I said, sure. Where's your address? He gave me his address and it was walking distance. I said, great. Let's do this Saturday morning. So I go over there. I take my SPL meter and I take my generator. That's it. No light meter, no laptop, nothing. So we look at the TV first, make some basic adjustments to the TV. I have him sitting next to me. So I'm saying, okay, can you see this? It's kind of like going to the optometrist. Left eye, right eye. So can you see this if I do this? No? Okay. Can you see it now? No. Can you see it now? Yes. Okay. Boom. That's where that adjustment needs to be made. So we ran through, like I said before, those 5 to 8 basic things. And then I ran through his audio system. I made sure the levels were set correctly. I made sure the distances were set correctly, and subwoofer crossover and main crossovers, and just the basic things you would do in an audio system. Yep. I was there for a little over an hour, and I think I charged him $149. Now, if I'm an integrator and I had put that system in, I probably wouldn't have charged him anything for that. That's just part of my service. That's part of what I do because I treat my customers better than the next guy and I want to stand out. So that's just what I do. So it just depends. In another case, on the other extreme example, I had a private client recently who worked for Microsoft, and he had an LG OLED and an Xbox, and he watched a lot of movies and TV shows in various formats. So we calibrated a day mode and night mode for SDR and a game mode for SDR. And then we calibrated HDR and an HDR game mode. And then we calibrated Dolby Vision and a Dolby Vision game mode. So while I was at this person's house, I calibrated 7 modes for them. And I was there for about 6 hours. And I charged him, I think I want to say I charged him like $700, but that's on the extreme end. Right around the middle for most people, I see anywhere from $300 to $400, and that's doing like a day mode, a night mode, and HDR. That might take 2.5 hours, and that's when you've got light meters and software and laptops and things like that. And then for projectors, most calibrators do tend to, if you're going all out and using your light meter and stuff, they tend to be just a little bit more because it takes more time and a lot more finesse with projectors. There's more things to worry about. So anywhere from free to $1,000, but okay. I would just base it off of time and what equipment I'm using and things like that. If it's a 15 to 20 minute thing with basic adjustments, I'm just including it with the installation. But if I get called out for something like that, I might be around $100.
No problem at all. And you've led me kind of into I see there's another couple of quick questions popped in, but you've led me quite nicely into something there.
Sure.
One of the questions that came in, and I'm going to just share my screen again, was if you obviously great that these test patterns are here on your website,
Sure.
Great resource. Obviously, if you want to take the next sort of step up from that, and you've obviously mentioned things like the Fox and Hound and whatnot through the conversation here. So I'll just, I think most people probably who have joined us today probably know who Murideo are and the range of tools that you guys do, but I'm just going to jump in and quickly kind of actually highlight what some of these tools are that you've been talking about. So this is the Fox and Hound, probably by far our best-selling tool that, you know, all of our staff, you know, Jason, Paul, myself, we all carry one of these pretty much regardless of any site we're going to, just because, as you said, it kind of gives us that easy availability to bring up these test patterns, test right the way through the signal path. Obviously, yeah, as you say, your Murideo purple. So this is the new 8K set. So we can generate, you know, a full 8K signal up to, I think it's a 40 gigabits per second resolution. We can play with the HDR. We can play with the resolution. We can change with the actual color spectrum. So yeah, I would say so. This is probably the next step up from carrying just a USB stick or your laptop with some of these things downloaded onto it. That would be your first sort of designated tool, would be the Fox and Hound. The step beyond that, if you are going to kind of go, as you say, Jason, down the rabbit hole into thinking about sort of full calibration, is the 6G. This is available as a complete kit as well with an analyzer. So you've got an end-to-end, but if you are doing just if your main interest is just in being able to generate a pattern that you know is at the quality that could be used for full calibration, even if you're not going to that level, then I think this is the piece of kit you generally carry around with you, isn't it?
It is. And I just do want to point out one thing so everybody's totally clear and understands this. If you are going to go down the rabbit hole, which I love the way you said that, and you're going to implement software with your laptop, you have to use the 6G. The Fox and Hound is fantastic for quick visual checks, like the things we talked about today. But the Fox and Hound generator does not work with any sort of PC-based software. If you go down that route, you've got to go with a 6G.
Perfect. Excellent. So let's see where we go next. There's quite a lot of questions now coming in. I think we've caught a lot of people's attention with those last few bits. So let's just run through, make sure I'm not missing anyone. If customers had a TV for a while, I'm going to leave my screen shared because there is something I want to come back to. But while we just cover these questions, if a customer's had a TV for a while, even just tweaking a few settings can often make them go, ugh, as they aren't used to the new, hopefully better picture. How do you counter this or convince them to try it for a while? So and I'll say I saw exactly that when I recently upgraded to a full 4K TV because I've been rocking a Pioneer Plasma for about the last 10 years.
That's awesome. That makes a nice bedroom TV, the Pioneer.
It's a nice radiator to keep the room warm.
Exactly. So this is a common thing. And I'll just give you sort of my experience on this, and hopefully it makes some sense. We talked a lot today about how the TVs from the factory come in an energy savings mode, but that's not always been the case. With Damien, with your Pioneer Plasma, for example, those older TVs would come in like a vivid mode or dynamic mode. We really weren't so concerned with energy savings back then. So when you had a Pioneer Plasma in vivid mode, it was, you know, overly bright and the whites were clipped, the blacks were crushed, the grayscale was too blue, the sharpness was cranked up, and that gave you a perception of a better picture in a showroom. Then you would get that TV into a darker living room and you would tone things down and people would say, ugh, I hate it. And the answer to that is give it a couple of days, watch some of your favorite shows, watch some of your favorite movies. And here's the key. When you're watching these things, I want you to look for this and this and this and this. And if you're still not happy with it, we'll undo it and go back to what you were used to. No problem. So we have to teach the person looking at the image what to look for in the image. So let's talk back about the basics. Can you see shadows? Can you see bright detail? Do the skin tones look natural? Does the image look nice and clear or overly sharpened? So if I give that customer things to look for and I say, check out this stuff, watch some of your favorite TV shows or movies. If you still don't like it in a few days, then we can undo it. No big deal. And that's how the store used to go back then. And I'm not exaggerating here. In thousands of calibrations, I can count on 2 fingers how many times it's happened to me where the customer says, I get it, but I just like it really bright. Cool. No problem. Let's go back to vivid mode. Extremely rare scenario. Here's the good news. It's the opposite today. So when you go to somebody's home and the TV's in energy savings out of the box, just by putting it into a cinema mode, which traditionally is the dark mode, at least it used to be, I've measured, and we gain anywhere from 50 and sometimes up to 75% more light. So you go from energy savings to cinema mode, picture gets brighter, boom, skin tones look better, boom. And I've never, ever had a customer say, I liked it a lot more dark and dull. It just doesn't happen. And I hope that answers that question. And if you have a follow-up to it, just let me know. But I think the answer is this. Teach them what to look for, look at some test patterns with them, encourage them to watch some things that they're familiar with. And if they don't like it, it's their TV, and, we're not the TV police. And if they like it the other way, then that's okay. But I'm just telling you, if you educate the customer and show them what to look for in the picture, let them live with it for a few days, it's very, very, very unlikely that they're going to want to go back. Cool. And I do want to add one more thing to this. If the complaint is, yeah, I get it, but it's still not as bright as I like, no problem. When you put a TV or a projector into a cinema mode or an ISF mode or filmmaker mode or whatever, in those modes by default, like LG OLED, for example, by default, the OLED light control, which is overall brightness of the image, is turned down to about 80, but it can go to 100. So if the customer says, yeah, I can see shadows better, but I wish it was just brighter, no problem, sir. Grab the remote, take the OLED light, crank it all the way up to 100. Now they're getting it much brighter like they like, but they're also getting the advantages of all the stuff we talked about today.
Perfect. Excellent. Let's see what we've got here. Question from Liam. How much extra detail do you think you get from going from the basic 8 changes through to a full calibration? He's guessing there's a bit of an element of diminishing returns.
Let's be honest, there kind of is, right? And when we talk about the amount of detail, we've already taken care of that with the brightness control for shadows. We've already taken that. We've already done that with the contrast control with bright images and bright parts of the picture. We've already taken care of the skin tones with the color saturation. We've already taken care of the color accuracy with the hue and tint control. And we've already taken care of the detail and the clarity of the picture with the sharpness control. Anything beyond that is just color correction. So will you gain more detail by doing color correction? Probably not, but you'll gain more color accuracy.
Yeah. And I guess part of this comes down to as well, if this is if you're going to spend the 15 minutes doing the lounge television or the secondary or third sort of room TV, that's probably what's going to happen. But if you've got
all the time
a huge 120-inch projected image, whilst it's a diminishing return for the extra, you're probably in a space where you're going to notice it more. Would that be fair?
Yeah, you're looking at a much bigger image. So any anomalies or any artifacts in the picture, you're going to see them on a huge screen now, and they're going to stand out. They're going to stand out a lot more. And I'll give you an example.
I guess whilst that's the more expensive part to handle, equally it's probably in the most expensive zone of the installation as well.
Yeah, it is. And I'll go back to the projector shootout that we did a few weekends ago. The Sony, this is no secret or not to knock them, this is just how they do it. But on Sony projectors, the black level comes out of the box defaulted to 50, and you cannot see all of your shadows at all until you go up to 52. So you go to 50 is the default, you can't see shadows. You go to 51, you still can't see shadows. You go to 52, and then boom, all of a sudden you can see your shadows. And that's doesn't matter what the screen size is at all. That's just how Sony calibrates their projectors from the factory. So whether the screen is small or big in a projection system, if it's a Sony, you still have to change the block level anyway, or you're going to run into this Game of Thrones issue.
Got it. And I think the last one that I've not covered in terms of questions is from Steve here. And I think we did touch on this during your presentation, but we'll just run quickly back over it. When calibrating, do you recommend turning off any image processing on the AVR and leave the HDMI output to auto, i.e. no upscaling?
So that's a really good question. And we do spend a decent amount of time talking about this in the full 3-day class, but you have to think about like which component in the system is going to do that processing better. So a good example might be this. You might have a $69 Blu-ray player because it's not used all that much. So they didn't want to spend a bunch of money. Totally get it. But you might have that plugged into a very nice TV. And that's probably going to be the case in most of the time, or a really nice projector. And this is a simple example, but I think you guys will get my point. If you set the Blu-ray player to always output 4K, but then you put in a 1080p or a 480p disc, guess which component's doing the upscaling? You're forcing the Blu-ray player to always do 4K. So the Blu-ray player is doing all of your upscaling. The other way you could do it is you put the Blu-ray player into a, sometimes they'll call it native or direct. I've seen source direct, like in the Oppo. So if you have the Blu-ray player in native, if the disc is 480, it'll spit the content out at 480, 1080 to 1080, 4K to 4K. So now if you're sending the projector a 1080p image, but it's a 4K projector, now the projector is doing all the upscaling. So something in the system has to upscale, at least in this example, and you just have to figure out which one's doing a better job. And guess what? It's really easy to do. Look at some content. And especially with upscaling, you want to look for noise, especially in the darkest parts of the picture. So here would be my workflow. I would pick a dark piece of content. Maybe it's Game of Thrones, whatever, anything dark, and set the Blu-ray player to always output 4K. And take a look at that image and look for noise and just look for anomalies in the dark parts of the picture. That's where they're easiest to see. So you look at it, maybe take some mental notes. Okay, it's a little noisy down here in the corner. It's not very noisy over here, maybe in the middle part of the screen, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So now you go back to the Blu-ray player, you've got some mental notes, and now you set the Blu-ray player to auto or to source direct or whatever, and look at the same image again. And if the image is less noisy, then that automatically tells you that the projector is doing a better job of your upscaling. That's the easiest way to figure that out.
And I guess it follows, you know, I think in your example, it makes a lot of sense, you know. There might be some really good $69 Blu-ray players out there.
I've seen them. There might be. I've seen them.
But if you've got a $5,000-$10,000 or pounds projector or TV that's got an upscaling capability, there's a strong chance that's going to have a better upscaling circuit in it.
You also have to know the display's strengths and weaknesses. So like one of the main reasons people buy a Sony over an LG is because the Sony processing is so good, especially with upscaling. That's what they're kind of known for. It's the same panel as the LG. It's the same amount of light output, but their processing and the guts are better. So why on earth would you want a $69 Blu-ray player to do your upscaling when you bought a Sony TV? So once you start to understand the display strengths and weaknesses, this becomes very easy.
Cool. I've realized we're kind of pushing on for time here, but some great questions, and that's, I think, what we expected.
Sure.
As I said, I left my screen kind of shared because there was a couple of things I wanted to touch into just to kind of close this out. Obviously, we will follow up with everybody with links to websites, test tools, patterns, all those kinds of things. One thing that Dustin, who was obviously on at the start of the session here, has done is for the 6G here, he's actually given us some special pricing, and that's going to run for the next sort of 3 months. So rather than just doing this as a promo that everyone's going to remember, what we've done is we've reduced the price of the product on our website. That is now live. I've left it hidden at the moment just on here, just because we have got people from outside of the UK, and it is all trade pricing. So if you've got a login, you can log in and find the latest pricing. If you are a trade buyer and you don't have a login, then just down the bottom of our website here, there is an open a new account link. Apply for an account, we'll get you a trade login, and you'll be able to access trade pricing for the 6G. That leads us obviously towards the next step beyond the kind of the 15 to 20 minute tips and tricks, if you like, that we've covered today. And that is that, are you delivering this one, Jason?
I am.
You are? So there is a ISF seminar training coming up. I think Jonathan did ask when the next courses were going to be. Jonathan, we've nothing in the UK planned right now, but the next course is this one in Barcelona, which is just before ISE. So if you were interested in that, then that's probably a good opportunity. Extend by a couple of days, get yourself on some ISE as well. If
you want to come to a nice warm Florida in March, then we're actually going to be doing a class right here at my office in March if you want to cross the pond.
No problem. Dustin has also offered that anyone who's obviously attended here today, he will give you $100 off the training price. There are the current dates. There is the Barcelona one. Or as you say, Jason, if you want to head over in March, there's Florida. I'll make sure everyone gets links to these as well. I think everyone, when you registered, you probably got a PDF link to the training that's coming up in Barcelona. Let me just stop sharing my screen there, and we're back. But I think we've done sort of 90 minutes there. I think before we really blow everyone's minds and people start forgetting things. I'm going to hit stop recording.